You have a notebook filled with ideas that could change your life, maybe even change the world. You've imagined the business you want to build, the book you want to write, the version of yourself you know you're capable of becoming. In your mind, the vision is vivid, detailed, almost inevitable. And yet, hours pass. You find yourself lying on the couch, scrolling through your phone. One video becomes 10, 10 become 50. Somewhere in the background, that quiet voice starts whispering again. You should be doing something. The guilt creeps in slowly. A heavy awareness that the life you imagine and the life you're actually living feel miles apart. From the outside, people might label this as laziness, but here's the strange part. Truly lazy people don't feel tormented by their inactivity. They don't spend hours replaying their goals in their head. They don't carry that constant tension between what they want to become and what they're currently doing. If anything, they're perfectly comfortable doing nothing. But you're not comfortable, are you? You're restless, dissatisfied, constantly aware that there is more inside you waiting to come out. This is the paradox of the lazy but ambitious person. On one hand, you have big dreams and a strong sense that you're meant for something more. On the other hand, when it's time to act, something inside you seems to shut down. It feels like your mind is pressing the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. And the longer this continues, the more confusing it becomes. Because deep down, you start wondering a painful question. What if I'm just not disciplined enough to become who I know I could be? But the truth is far more complex and far more hopeful, because what feels like laziness is often something else entirely. A hidden psychological mechanism your brain developed to protect you from pressures you might not even realize. And once you understand that mechanism, the paradox begins to make sense. Before we go any further, we need to challenge one of the most misunderstood words in modern culture: laziness. For generations, laziness has been treated like a character flaw, a sign that someone simply lacks discipline, willpower, or work ethic. If you're not taking action toward your goals, the explanation must be simple: you're just not trying hard enough. But psychology tells a very different story. True laziness is surprisingly rare. Real laziness means you genuinely don't care. You have no real desire to improve, no inner tension pushing you towards something greater. You feel comfortable remaining exactly where you are. But that doesn't sound like the experience we described earlier. The person caught in the lazy but ambitious paradox doesn't feel comfortable at all. They feel restless, frustrated, even ashamed of how much time slips away without progress. They might spend entire evenings thinking about the life they want to build. They replay their plans in their mind, imagining the moment everything finally clicks. And yet when the moment comes to actually begin, something inside them hesitates. This hesitation isn't a lack of desire. In fact, it often comes from the opposite problem. The desire is so strong that it creates pressure. The goal becomes so important, so tied to your sense of identity, that starting suddenly feels dangerous. Because starting means risking failure. And failure doesn't just threaten the project, it threatens the way you see yourself. So instead of moving forward, the brain does something unexpected. It stalls. What looks like laziness from the outside is often something much more complex on the inside. It's not a lack of ambition. It's a mind trying to navigate a level of internal pressure it doesn't yet know how to manage. And to understand why that pressure can become paralyzing, we have to look deeper into how the brain responds to overwhelming goals. To understand why ambitious people sometimes feel completely unable to act, we need to look at how the brain actually handles goals and pressure. Inside your brain, there is a region called the prefrontal cortex. You can think of it as the CEO of your mind. It's responsible for planning, organizing, prioritizing tasks, and turning ideas into action. When everything is functioning smoothly, this part of the brain helps you break big goals into manageable steps and move forward one decision at a time. But the prefrontal cortex doesn't operate alone. Another powerful system sits deeper in the brain: the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. Its job is simple: scan the environment for danger and trigger survival responses when something feels overwhelming. When you imagine a massive life goal, starting a business, writing a book, completely transforming your life, your brain doesn't just see ambition. Sometimes it sees risk. Risk of failure, risk of embarrassment, risk of discovering that you're not as capable as you hoped. When the amygdala interprets a situation as threatening, it activates the body's survival responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Most people are familiar with fight or flight, but freeze is quieter and often misunderstood. Instead of running away or confronting the challenge, the nervous system simply shuts down the action pathway. You hesitate, you stall, you suddenly feel an almost invisible resistance to starting. This is where something called executive dysfunction can appear. The brain's planning system struggles to translate intention into action, not because the goal doesn't matter, but because it matters too much. The larger and more emotionally loaded the goal becomes, the more overwhelming the starting point feels. Your mind sees the mountain but can't clearly see the first step. So instead of climbing, you pause, you open your phone, you check messages, you tell yourself you'll start later. From the outside, it looks like procrastination, but internally, it's often the nervous system trying to protect you from psychological overload. Your brain isn't refusing to act because it doesn't care. It's hesitating because, in a strange way, it cares too deeply about the outcome. If you look closely at the lives of many lazy but ambitious people, a pattern often appears much earlier than adulthood. It usually begins in childhood. Many of these individuals were once described with a very specific label, the smart one. Maybe school felt easy. Maybe you understood things faster than others. Teachers praised your intelligence. Adults told you that you had so much potential. Over time, that praise slowly shaped your identity. You didn't just perform well in school. You began to see yourself as someone who was naturally capable of success. And while that sounds like a gift, it can quietly create a psychological trap. When things come easily during childhood, you rarely need to develop the skills that matter most later in life. Skills like persistence, discipline, and the ability to tolerate frustration. You move forward through talent rather than through long-term effort. But adulthood works very differently. The goals that truly matter, building a career, creating something meaningful, mastering a difficult craft, are rarely solved by intelligence alone. They demand something else entirely, consistent effort over long periods of time. For someone who grew up being praised for their potential, this shift can feel deeply uncomfortable. Because the moment things stop being easy, a quiet fear can appear. What if I'm not actually as capable as people once believed? Instead of confronting that possibility, the mind sometimes chooses a safer route: hesitation. If you never fully commit, you never have to fully test that identity. This is why some highly capable people appear to stall in adulthood. It's not because they lack intelligence or ambition. It's because for the first time in their lives, success requires a kind of psychological endurance they were never taught to build. At first glance, perfectionism looks like a strength. It's often associated with high standards, discipline, and the desire to do things well. In many cultures, perfectionism is even praised as the mindset of people who strive for excellence. But psychologically, perfectionism has a darker side, one that quietly feeds procrastination. For many ambitious people, perfectionism doesn't mean doing things perfectly. It means feeling that if something cannot be done perfectly, it might be safer not to do it at all. Think about what happens when you approach a goal that matters deeply to you. Maybe it's starting a business, writing a book, launching a creative project, or pursuing a career you truly care about. Because the goal is so important, your standards become extremely high. Your mind begins imagining the best possible outcome, the perfect version of the project, the ideal result, the moment when everything works exactly as planned. But then another thought appears. What if it doesn't turn out that way? What if the first attempt is awkward? What if the work isn't impressive? What if people judge it, or worse, ignore it completely? Suddenly, the act of starting carries emotional risk, and this is where procrastination quietly steps in as a psychological defense mechanism. If you never truly begin, you never truly fail. Your potential remains untouched, preserved in imagination. You can always tell yourself, I didn't really try. If I had tried seriously, it would have worked. In this way, procrastination becomes a form of protection. It shields your self-image from being tested in the real world, but there's a hidden cost. The longer you delay action, the more intimidating the task becomes. The project grows larger in your mind, your expectations grow higher, and the pressure to perform perfectly increases. And slowly, without realizing it, you enter what psychologists sometimes describe as the perfectionism procrastination loop. You wait for the perfect moment to begin, but the perfect moment never arrives. One of the most difficult psychological tensions behind the lazy but ambitious paradox is something called an identity conflict. Inside your mind, two very different versions of yourself can exist at the same time. The first is your ideal self. This is the version of you that lives in your imagination, the person who finally fulfills their potential. In this vision, you are focused, disciplined, productive. You build meaningful things, pursue your goals consistently, and become the person you always believed you could be. This version of you feels powerful, inspiring, almost inevitable. But then there is the actual self, the person who sometimes struggles to start, the one who delays tasks, the one who watches time pass while the goals remain unfinished. When these two versions drift too far apart, something uncomfortable begins to grow in the space between them. Shame. Not loud, dramatic shame, but a quiet, persistent feeling that you're somehow falling short of who you were supposed to become. And the strange thing about shame is that it rarely motivates action. More often, it creates avoidance. The larger your vision of your future self becomes, the more intimidating it can feel to take small, imperfect steps in the present. Because every small step risks exposing the gap between who you imagine yourself to be and who you currently are. So the mind does something protective. It delays action. As long as the vision stays in your imagination, it remains flawless, untouched by mistakes or disappointment. But this protection comes with a hidden cost, because while potential feels powerful, potential alone cannot change your life. Only reality can. There is another powerful force shaping the behavior of ambitious but inactive people, and it comes from the brain's reward system, dopamine. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical, but in reality, it plays a much more important role. Dopamine is the brain's motivation signal. It drives curiosity, focus, and the desire to pursue rewards. When dopamine levels rise, your brain becomes energized to move towards something meaningful. The problem is that the modern environment has completely changed how this system works. In the past, dopamine was primarily triggered by effortful achievements, solving problems, building something, progressing toward long-term goals. These activities required patience and sustained attention. Today, however, the brain has access to an endless stream of instant stimulation. A single swipe on your phone can deliver novelty, entertainment, social validation, or emotional excitement within seconds. Platforms are carefully designed to keep your attention by delivering unpredictable rewards, new videos, new posts, new notifications. Each small hit releases a quick burst of dopamine. At first, this seems harmless, but over time, the brain begins to adapt. It becomes accustomed to receiving rewards immediately and effortlessly. Now consider what happens when you try to work on a meaningful ambition. Writing a book does not deliver dopamine in 5 seconds. Starting a business does not reward you instantly. Learning a difficult skill often feels slow and frustrating at the beginning. Compared to the rapid stimulation of your phone, these activities feel almost painfully dull, so your brain begins making a calculation. Why invest energy in something that might reward you months or years from now, when you can receive stimulation instantly with almost no effort? This is how the reward system becomes hijacked by cheap dopamine. You don't lose your ambition. In fact, the vision of success may still excite you deeply. But the everyday actions required to reach that vision begin to feel strangely difficult, not because you're lazy, but because your brain has quietly learned to expect huge rewards for very little effort. There is another subtle trap that ambitious people often fall into, and it's far more deceptive than simple procrastination. Psychologists sometimes refer to it as fantasy productivity. This is the strange state where you feel productive without actually producing anything. You might spend hours researching business ideas, watching videos about successful entrepreneurs, reading articles about productivity systems, or reorganizing your notes and plans. On the surface, it looks like preparation. It feels like you're getting closer to your goals, but in reality, nothing concrete is being created. No pages written, no project launched, no real step taken into the uncertain world of execution. The reason this trap is so powerful is that it gives your brain a safe illusion of progress. Planning feels intelligent, learning feels responsible, organizing ideas feels productive. These activities provide small psychological rewards because they make you feel connected to your ambition. But they also avoid the most uncomfortable part of growth, exposure to failure. Researching a business idea is safe. Starting one is risky. Watching a video about writing is safe. Opening a blank document and facing your own thoughts is not. So the mind drifts toward the safer activity, and slowly, without realizing it, you can spend months, or even years, living in preparation mode. Your ambition stays alive in theory, but execution remains permanently postponed. Because planning protects your confidence, execution tests it. If massive ambition can sometimes paralyze action, the solution is not more pressure or more motivation. In fact, trying to force yourself into sudden dramatic change often makes the problem worse. Many ambitious people fall into this cycle. One day, they feel inspired, watch a motivational video, and make a powerful declaration. Starting tomorrow, everything changes. They plan to wake up at 5 in the morning, exercise every day, work for hours on their goals, read more, learn more, become a completely different person overnight. And for a day or two, it might even work. But then the system collapses. Not because you lack discipline, but because your brain interprets that level of change as overwhelming. The same threat response we talked about earlier quietly returns. The goals feel too large again, and the mind slips back into avoidance. This is why many psychologists and behavioral scientists recommend something very different: micro-execution. Instead of focusing on massive action, you shrink the starting point until it becomes almost impossible to resist. Don't tell yourself to write an entire chapter. Tell yourself to write one sentence. Don't promise to work out for an hour. Tell yourself to put on your running shoes. Don't commit to building the entire project today. Commit to opening the document and taking the smallest visible step forward. These tiny actions may seem insignificant, but they serve an important psychological purpose. They bypass the brain's overwhelm response and allow motion to begin. And once motion begins, something interesting happens. Momentum starts to build. Because the hardest part of any meaningful task is rarely the work itself. It's simply starting. There is a quiet realization that many ambitious people eventually face. For years, they believed their biggest struggle was laziness. But when they look closer, they begin to see something different. They weren't protecting their time. They were protecting their potential. As long as your dreams stay inside your head, they remain perfect, untouched by mistakes, criticism, or failure. Your future self can stay powerful in imagination. But the moment you step into the real world and begin acting, that perfection disappears. The work becomes messy, imperfect, slow, and that's exactly where real growth begins. Because potential alone doesn't change your life, only action does. So today, don't try to change everything overnight. Just take one small step, the smallest step that moves you forward. And if this video helped you understand the invisible battle inside your mind, consider subscribing to the channel. We talk about the deeper psychology behind ambition, behavior, and the quiet struggles most people never discuss. And before you go, leave a comment below. What is one goal you've been avoiding? And what tiny step will you take today? Your future might begin with that single action. Thank you for watching.